Bring in Andrew Clennell now, who's joined by the Labor frontbencher Tony Burke. Andrew.
Shadow Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke joins me now. Thanks for joining us. I want to start with the obvious, I guess. Anthony Albanese's gaffes. Now, you've been a long-term backer of Anthony Albanese. Has he got the grasp on detail required to be Prime Minister of Australia?
Absolutely. And what matters is how the policies will affect people's lives. So whether it's the NDIS, where a lot was made in the Sky News debate over Mr Morrison's comment about the blessing comment with the question. The issue that not as much was made about was the fact that he never answered the question about the cut. He never answered the question about what was happening in people's lives affected by the NDIS, and our proposals do affect that and fix that. Similarly, for people who can't find their way into a home, Help to Buy gets people a pathway into home ownership. At a time when everything's going up except wages, what the policies do and how they improve people's lives is what matters.
OK, but seriously, how did he not know the national unemployment rate? How did he not know at least a couple of points of an NDIS plan that's your main policy? How do you explain it?
Look, in terms of the unemployment rate issue, he took ownership of that on the day, same day he was there, and unlike Mr Morrison, was willing to take responsibility.
Yeah, but how?
In terms of the NDIS...
I mean, surely you've spoken to him about it. How did he stuff it up?
In terms of the NDIS, what matters there is he was explaining how that policy changes people's lives. Instead of having computers at the centre of a system, to have people at the centre of a system, which is what the NDIS was always meant to be. It was meant to deliver people that level of autonomy. And for a long time now, we've seen underspending in the NDIS. For a long time now, we've seen cuts. And you talk to people out on the street who are affected by these policies, they'll tell you specific services that they're now being told they're not eligible for.
All right, but has he paid the sort of attention to policy development that he should have? Has he been all over that as a leader?
Yeah, he has, and it's been very much from the perspective every time. How does this policy improve someone's life? How does it deliver a better future for people, not the pop quiz?
How confident... Well, speaking of pop quizzes...
Oh, God,
how confident... No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that, don't worry. How confident are you about his performance going into the debates? I mean, he's doing 3 and 4 days. It's pretty gruelling for an opposition leader.
Oh, it is. I was with him yesterday on the Tasmanian trip. I'll tell you what, he is hungry, he is keen. We know to take nothing for granted. Like, we absolutely know this is going to be a fight right to the finish line, not just at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday, but Western Australian time, 6 p.m. as well. This will be an election night that'll be late. Anthony knows that it's going to go right down to the wire and we're not missing an opportunity.
All right, because could Labor be about to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory here if Anthony Albanese makes a couple more mistakes?
We've never taken this for granted, but what we are working through the whole way through is the clear choice. Yeah, more of the same doesn't mean everything stays good. More of the same means where people are currently going backwards, they go further backwards. And that's all Mr Morrison's offering. Anthony coming forward with a better future is all about making sure that for these challenges, be it aged care, be it childcare, be it everything going up except your wages, for all of these challenges, to have a plan to be able to deal with issues where Mr Morrison is only interested in the spin. OK, well, let's talk about the prospect of a hung parliament. You're the opposition manager of business. Do you feel the teal independents would more likely go with you given Labor's policies on climate and ICAC? I have no idea which way they go. In terms of a hung parliament, as you know, we're the only party shooting for a majority in our own right. Technically, the government doesn't have a majority on the floor right now. Yeah, like we're already in that
They almost do, though. They almost do.
Almost a majority. It's not a majority.
Well, OK.
So that's a situation that they're in already.
What about the other scenario where it's like 71 seats each? Would we have to have another election?
Look, you're talking about a decision that's made by the Governor-General on that. We're in a situation where we're shooting for a majority. We're doing the work seat by seat, conversation by conversation, and our candidates front door by front door in making sure we can get to that majority. No matter what the circumstance is for Mr Morrison, even if he technically got a majority, he still has to not lock that in. He still has to have the conversation with Barnaby Joyce to negotiate a secret agreement on which the whole government would rest. They have never told us what's in it.
I want to ask you about national security. Let's hear these comments from Peter Dutton about Penny Wong at the Press Club last week.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Chinese Communist Party would like to see a change of government at the 21 May election. No question at all. And I think there's evidence of that on the WeChat activity, which is a Communist Party dominated and influenced platform, the interference with the Prime Minister's own WeChat page there, the way in which editors of Chinese language newspapers in our country have been lent on, I think is further evidence, and other elements obviously that I can't go into publicly. So I stand by that statement, believe it very strongly.
So he says Labor are appeasers of the Chinese government and Penny Wong will be sucked in by President Xi. What do you say to that?
It's a pretty extraordinary overreach. Like, if your starting point in foreign affairs and national security is how do I score a domestic point, you're always going to get it wrong. And their obsession with domestic politics and wanting to wedge everything against Labor rather than just look after the security of the nation, that's led us down a pathway, where we end up with $5.5 billion being signed off for submarines that will never get built, where we end up with a situation where the Solomons hadn't had the visit for so long from a senior minister.
So you're as sceptical as the government about the CCP then? You won't be a soft touch?
Oh, there is no doubt China has changed. No doubt. And in that change, it hasn't just become more assertive. The government of China has become more aggressive as well. That's why we've described what's happened in the Solomons as the greatest foreign affairs failure that Australia's seen since World War II.
Okay.
The scale of this is real. It is not helped if you turn it into let's do the quick jab to Manchurian Candidate or whatever game they want to play. National security is serious. You don't treat it as a domestic game, but Mr Dutton does, Mr Morrison does.
OK, so I wanted to ask you about your portfolio. The RBA saying increasing wages will simply drive up inflation. There is also evidence around wages are increasing, not as much as inflation because of the labour shortage. You say you will increase wages in government. How? And won't this just drive up inflation?
The RBA has made clear that if wage growth goes to no more than the inflation level plus productivity, at the moment productivity is running at 1%, then you don't actually have inflationary pressure. What's happening at the moment, though, is far less than keeping up. People are going backwards. Now, the concept of it taking so long for people to be able to get in front again is exactly right from the RBA governor if government doesn't act. OK,
so how are you going to do it? Are you going to have a Bob Hawke style accord? What's your plan?
Look, the first thing is you look at all the ways, effectively, that the wages bucket is leaking. You look at all the different ways that wages are being undercut. It's happening through rorts with labour hire, with same job, same pay. It's happening in the gig economy where the government won't even guarantee that minimum wages should be met. I never thought the hardest question you could ask the Prime Minister of Australia would be, should every Australian be paid at least the minimum wage? Their answer is that's complicated.
But what are you going to do?
We'll regulate the gig economy. We'll set minimum standards. And the gig economy is not just the apps that you might have on your phone. Like, you've probably got Uber, you've probably got some food delivery apps. A whole lot of the NDIS is now delivered through the gig economy. A whole lot of the care economy. People are effectively employed by an algorithm in a race to the bottom for what rates of pay people will accept.
Do you want to lift the minimum wage?
Oh, we want to be able to see the minimum. We want to be able to see the minimum wage continue to go forward. Now, the current process, where that's at in submissions in terms of the timing of the election, is very late. But I've been going through really carefully through what the government's had to say there in their submission. I have more to say about that later in the campaign.
All right. Just finally, I wanted to ask you about boat turnbacks. You were Immigration Minister when offshore processing was reintroduced, when Kevin Rudd became PM again. Take us through that. Why did you not use turnbacks at that time? How do they operate? And are you confident a Labor government could implement them? Because Scott Morrison says you can't.
Operation Sovereign Borders remains unchanged. And with Operation Sovereign Borders, General Campbell came up with a way. Now, how they're doing it now, it's probably continued to modify. But at the point when things changed in 2014, came up with a way of effectively transferring people to a different vessel which hadn't been possible even towards the end of the Howard years, because the vessels were being spiked, they were sinking, turning into a safety at sea issue.
Yeah, so
Once General Campbell came up with that transfer method, now we'd previously proposed a transferred method with planes. Scott Morrison spiked that with the Malaysia agreement, and half the people who drowned after Morrison had spiked that. But in terms of the transfer arrangements that were developed through Operation Sovereign Borders, that was a game changer. It was a good idea. We had already reduced the number of people arriving by boat by 80% through the changes that came in when Kevin Rudd returned and I became Immigration Minister. So a big shift had already happened. That final change that was made by General Campbell was the right policy, and Operation Sovereign Borders continues under us.
But just very quickly, we're out of time. Why are you axing temporary protection visas? Aren't they a good deterrent?
They're irrelevant. The boat stopped at a time, and people forget the chronology. When the boats
But why
were
not
stopped,
just leave them in place?
When the boats were stopped, they were in place. Temporary protection visas were abolished some time after the boats had stopped. We're now in a situation where you've got people who are living in Australia who are not going back and are just going to be told for the rest of their lives that they don't quite belong. Yeah, it's not in anyone's interest to do it that way. People know that people on temporary protection visas, it's a huge processing cost, that effectively the government's keeping it in place, even though no one knew's going on to them. The government's keeping it in place simply to keep a political argument going. That's not in the national interest. It's not required for operational sovereign borders. It's not something that, that is a difference in politics between us and the government. It's a difference in how we treat those individuals. It's not a difference in terms of whether or not boats arrive.
Tony Burke, thanks for your time.
Great to be here.